Hey everybody, welcome to another midweek conversation where we talk about this past Sunday's message, the readings, any questions we received from you all, really wherever the conversation may take us. And so this past Sunday, we were looking at 1 Timothy 4, 7-16, the idea of training for godliness, what that requires in terms of mindset, what that requires in terms of practical application and metrics to track ourselves to see if we are making progress, what those words even mean. So great passage. We've got readings from the Old Testament, New Testament, looking at these things because honestly, and I didn't get into this in the sermon because I knew it was already going to be a challenging sermon, so I wasn't trying to heap even more challenge on people. Mm-hmm. But, and we touched on, I'm not going to say we didn't talk about it at all. It wasn't a primary point, but this idea of training for godliness should be, not like might be or could be, this should be every Christian's desire. Mm-hmm. If I was ever talking to a Christian who felt no desire to grow in godliness or train for godliness, I would be incredibly alarmed and very, very concerned. And so I think it's a vital passage, not like any of the Bible's not vital, but like right. This is one where it's like, no, this is not something that you can just assume is relevant for other people or something.
Yeah, you see the very purpose of your life laid out before you in this passage, you know.
If you've ever, like, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? This. Mm-hmm. Like, undoubtedly this. Everything else is secondary detail. Like, right. What am I supposed to do with my career? I don't know, but within your career, you should be training for godliness.
Yeah,
like, should I get married? Should I not get married? Yeah. I don't know if you should get married or not get married, but I know either in your singleness or in your marriage, you should be training for godliness. Like, yeah. This transcends all of that.
Yeah, all the minute details of life.
Yeah, the minute details.
Yeah, and thinking about it, I was thinking about it over the days after, it came to mind just the different, I guess, stages of godliness we can be at, if we can say we're at different stages of godliness. You know, we are progressing.
Paul uses now I would say like broad stages, like. You couldn't, I don't think you could pinpoint right, like I'm in stage 2.7, right? But Paul talks about like spiritual infants, spiritual children, spiritually mature. So I think you can use a rough, like,
there's
kid, adolescent, adult, like broad strokes.
Yeah. And so thinking about that, what advice would you have, and we'll kind of go in ascending order, I guess. What advice would you have for someone who is new to the idea of training in godliness? Maybe they're a new believer, or maybe they've been a believer for a while, but this really spurred them on.
Which and I would still would put them in that like infant godliness, young in faith.
Yeah, and so this is really their first exposure to this idea of disciplined, maturing faith. Yep. You
know, honestly, the same advice I would give that we were given as young parents, that we've got like. Start with the basics, right? Like before I'm trying to get our second daughter is 16 months, 15 or 16 months. No, maybe 18 months. That's beside the point. But regardless, right? She's in that range.
She's going to watch this someday
and be like, Dad, come on. She is at least, here, I'll say that she's at least 15 months. I don't think she's past 18 months if I'm doing my math correctly. I'm not worried about her riding a bike like a two-wheeler right now, right? We're working on like, okay, you've been walking now for a little bit. Let's continue to help you with that coordination. She's a toddler. Toddler is the most appropriately named stage of life that anyone has ever given to anything. She just toddles around. Like the other day was hilarious because she wasn't hurt. That's why it was funny. Right. And she's walking beside me. And for some reason, she just kind of like turns and walks into the wall and falls down, right? And she even giggled.
Right.
I'm not worried about like, okay, can she do complex algebra right now?
Right.
It's what is appropriate for her stage of life. So if godliness is new to you, if you are a spiritual infant, a spiritual toddler, a spiritual child, focus on the basics. Focus on, do I understand? And if you're a believer, I would say you do to some degree, but do I understand salvation? Can I explain, not as perfectly as somebody who's been doing it for 20, 30 years, but like, can I explain grace? Can I explain mercy? Can I explain why Jesus had to die on the cross? Can I understand and explain what it means to call him Lord, right? Like, okay, when I say Jesus is Lord, that means I'm coming under his lordship. Great. What does that mean? Oh, that means I'm living for him. That means I'm obeying him. I'm seeking to please him. These are all foundational. And so just because they're simple doesn't mean they're bad. I can think of people who've been Christians for 30, 40 years where I'm like, you need to go back to the basics. So start with the basics. Start with identifying, okay, what are the core messages of the gospel? Can I articulate them? Can I explain them? Am I growing in them?
Mm-hmm.
Do I understand? You talk about a foundational principle beyond just, and the reason I'm talking about, can you understand and explain the gospel? Because one of the calls on every Christian's life, regardless of how new you are or not, is evangelism. Evangelizo, verbally proclaim and explain. So can I understand what I'm called to do? And then do I understand the calling on my life to walk in step with the Spirit? What does that mean to walk in step with the Spirit? Well, to produce the fruit of the Spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so can I look at my life and see love, joy, peace?
Mm-hmm.
If you're in that stage, and if you are in that stage and you're literally looking for this, reach out to us. I would identify, I can think of like 5 or 6 key passages and verses that I would say, memorize these, take them to heart, take them seriously, right? Let's focus with getting you up on your feet and walking forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is. It's such an important stage too, because you think of the excitement of when your faith is so fresh and so new to you, and you can use that in such a meaningful way to establish a very firm foundation, so that when, maybe you're further on in your faith, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but when some of that despondency comes in, or the routineness of your faith, what you've established in your excitement has stayed, and it's still firm, and you took the opportunity to learn and grow in things. And yeah, it's vital to use it well and not let it be just a flickering flame for a super long time. You know?
That church camp high that is part of Christian vernacular.
Yeah. So moving, I guess, then on to the next stage, if you will, maybe that intermediate stage of growing in godliness, but still knowing that you have a long way to go. Maybe you've been a Christian for a couple years or coming up on a decade, but you're still feeling young in your faith a little bit,
So now I'm going again back to scripture, right, where Paul is writing, and he actually admonishes the people at one point, and he says, hey, look, by this point you should be onto solid food, but you still need milk because you're refusing to grow up.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with starting with the very basic principles of Christianity and the Christian life and stuff, but at some point your theology should deepen. And so if you've been a Christian for 7-8 years and you're still like, John 3:16 is the only verse I know, right? Okay, start expanding your diet, right? Let's bring it back to kids. One of the things you do as your kid is growing is you start to introduce new foods to them, and you start to introduce new skills to them, right? And so one of the most recent skills we introduced to Naomi, recently, maybe within the last couple of months, is like fork and spoon. And she'll still try and grab for food with a hammer. Like, no, you have a fork for a reason, right? Like, use your fork, learn to use your fork. And so now let's translate this to the spiritual life, right? If I said you start with these 5 or 6 verses, these 5 or 6 ideas, okay, now progress beyond that. Great. You can explain sin, salvation, resurrection. Awesome. Start to broaden your horizons. Start to broaden your understanding of Scripture. Great. You've read the book of, you talk to like a brand new Christian, like, I love the book of John. And you're like, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like John and Romans, you've probably been in that a lot, right? Like, okay, great. Now start getting into the other epistles, right? Start getting into Corinthians and Thessalonians and General Electric Power Company and things like that. Like, let's expand. Let's start to get into some Old Testament history. Let's not stick in the same repeat. Like, I shouldn't have to lay this foundation, Paul says. I shouldn't have to lay this foundation of grace and salvation over and over and over again. So look at your understanding of theology and identify, okay, where am I actually going deeper? What new books am I reading? What am I now trying for myself as I seek to understand not just this foundation, but then what is built upon the foundation? Am I understanding the church on a deeper level? Am I understanding missions on a deeper level, evangelism on a deeper level, apologetics on a deeper level? All of that, I would say, would be great indications of I'm moving beyond milk to solid food.
And you probably confused a lot of people. You mean Galatians, Ephesians,
Philippians, Colossians.
Not General Electric Power Company.
I do mean General Electric Power Company, because that is the easiest way that is forever ingrained in my brain of what's the order of those 4? General Electric Power Company.
But yeah, I think that it really is the phase of challenging yourself in ways that you wouldn't, recommend a young Christian to challenge themselves, of going past the, sometimes as they're called in Scripture, the elementary doctrines, and making sure that we don't devalue those either, right?
No, you have to start there. Before you ride a 2-wheeler, you've probably started on a tricycle or a pedal bike or, you know, a push bike or something like that.
Yeah, you don't want to, I think sometimes the maturing Christian will make the mistake of, and I know I made it in my teen years, of almost feeling like at a certain point you move past the gospel. Like, oh, that was salvific, now I'm on to like education. And doing that really devalues the core of your faith. And if you're devaluing the core of your faith, you're not growing. You're actually just eating yourself from the inside out. And so as we mature, we don't want to, it's not like stage one and then you cut off stage one to go to stage two, right?
You're always
building upon it.
That's why pyramids don't just say like, okay, well now let's build a new level. No, we have to only build top what is already there.
Yeah. And so, you never want to go past the beginning, but you do want to make sure that you are growing on top of that. You are strengthening on top of that and learning things. And I think, like you said, probably the greatest mark of growth in this area would be your engagement with the church. You know, we don't expect, it's awesome when they do, but we don't expect baby believers to serve right away. Sometimes they do, and that's awesome, but we don't expect that out of them.
But even within that, we have very specific areas where we would let them serve.
Yeah.
You know, it would not be like, oh, hey, you've been a Christian for 3 months. Like, you should teach a Bible study, right?
Yeah,
it's like, you know what? Let's put you on the greeting team.
We've seen in Timothy, deacons, elders, both have the qualification of you can't be a brand new believer. And so there are a lot of ways that we wouldn't expect new believers to serve, that as you're maturing, you can step up and you can serve. You know?
I would talk a new believer. I was talking to a new believer one time, and they were, when I say new believer, I'm talking like 2 weeks, right? Maybe a week. And they're like, well, I texted my one buddy and he's like, well, our church is going through Ezekiel right now. So I think I'm going to jump in. I think the first Bible book I'm going to read is Ezekiel. And I was like, that's a terrible idea. Yeah. You won't understand anything. You will be like,
you'll be confused.
I promise you that will be very frustrating for you. Like, and he's like, no. And I was like, okay. And I just asked him some of the basics. We're like, hey, articulate this for me. And he was like, well, I think it's kind of, I was like, no, it's not that. Like, do not read Ezekiel, right? Like,
you need the background knowledge.
You need the background, right? Go read this.
Yeah.
But then at some point, that's where I say like, well, tell me what you're reading in scripture. And if you're only reading the same 3 books you've only ever read, all right, it's time to stretch our muscles a little bit.
And I think as that middle stage Christian as well, I think that'd be the time to start challenging yourself with things like commentaries or study Bibles or deeper study resources, so that if you have read, you know, maybe you did as a baby believer read the whole Bible multiple times and you were fresh out of the gate like that, now start to challenge yourself with, well, I'm not just going to read, I'm going to understand. You know, I'm not just going to do this as a routine. I'm going to really get into it and learn from it and deepen in that way. So I guess third category, which wouldn't be fully mature because, you know, we're never fully mature, but more just your believers who they've been doing this a long time, you know, 15, 20, 30, 40, however many years. And maybe the danger of roteness, staleness is setting in a little bit. How are they to go about training in godliness, you know?
So the biggest thing I'm looking for there, if you're going to come to me and tell me I'm a mature believer, I'm not in the kid stage, I'm not in the adolescent stage, I'm in the mature, I'm an adult, right? I'm going to say, show me your multiplication. Jesus does not say go and make converts. Jesus says go and make disciples. What do? Disciples transform their life and they follow, and then they bear fruit, and they are also multiplying. What is 2 Timothy 2:2? What you have received from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. You have 4 iterations of impact right there, right? And so if someone's going to come to me and say, I'm a mature believer, I'm in the mature stage of my faith, I'm immediately going, where's the proof of multiplication? If there's no proof of multiplication, I'm going to be questioning your maturity a little bit, because part of maturing as a believer is going to understand that, okay, this is not just for me. Like I'm meant to be edifying the church and building up the church and exhorting the church. I'm meant to be taking the gospel to the nations. So, you know, like, and so if I'm not doing any of those things, I'm questioning the maturity of someone's faith. So if you can see those things, great. If you're in that stage and you would say I'm a mature believer, but you're even listening to this and you're like, oh man, those things aren't there because it maybe has grown rote or routine or something, then I ironically bring it back to the very foundational level stuff, right? Of like, okay, well, what does it mean to be a believer? What does it mean to say that Jesus is Lord? Well, to do what he says. Luke 6:46. I quote this one all the time. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Right. And so that's the foundation. But you've been doing it so long, you've lost sight of the foundation. So let's go back to the foundation. Well, what has he told you to do? He's told you to make disciples. Now that brings back to, if you're really mature, you should be bringing disciples. What has he told me to do? Proclaim. Okay, well, tell me about the last time you shared an element of the gospel with someone. Well, I only hang out with Christians. Okay, well, let's talk about that, right? And so I think a lot of the times it becomes rote and familiar and complacent for us because we lose sight of, we get puffed up with, and again, let's quote scripture, right? Knowledge puffs up, love builds up. And so we get puffed up with our knowledge that we gained in the adolescent stage, right? That's why I was at my cockiest, most arrogant, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say the vast majority of people are at their cockiest, most arrogant in that 16 to 20, right? That 4-year window, because you're like, I can drive now. I can understand this. I'm getting ready, right? Like
you feel like you're gaining the most knowledge.
Yep. So you've gained all this knowledge, and now you have a chance to actually go and get your first job and your first, like maybe, first full-time job or part-time job or something. You can actually drive yourself there. And that happens with believers, right? We understand I'm not a toddler anymore. I'm in that adolescent stage. Man, look at all this knowledge I'm gaining. Like, wow, I have really cool. This is it. And we fall into this trap of then maturing in faith is just accumulation of, okay, the more I know, the more I know, the more I know, the more I know, that's proof of my maturation. No, really proof of maturation is fruit production, fruit bearing. You go to 1 John, right? Go to Jesus's discourse with the disciples in the room, the upper room, and what we've been called to do. And so I think it becomes routine and our maturation stalls when we lose sight of what actually defines maturation. And if Jesus is the vine and we are the branches, well, a mature branch repeatedly produces fruit. And so if we're not producing fruit, then I think we have to ask, am I really a mature branch or not? And I'm not saying don't. If you haven't converted X number of people, you're not a mature branch. If you right, like
it's not statistic.
This is not quantitative, but you should be able to look at your life and see a production of fruit as proof and evidence of maturation in faith. And honestly, I've had this conversation with a couple of people. I think the greatest sign of mature faith and maturing faith is a deep awareness of how much maturing someone still has to do, and a hunger to do that, right? Like it almost happens without fail. I don't know if I can say every time, but without fail, I'll give a sermon on something and something challenging about growing in this, and people come up to me like, man, that like was so convicting. Like I need to grow in this so much. And I'm sitting there going like, are you kidding me? You like exemplify this, right? But because their heart is mature and desiring maturation, they're looking at, well, that's where Jesus is. And I have so much more growing to do, right?
I want to be there.
Yeah. It's the ones where you give the sermon and you're like, hey, this is, and they're like, I'm probably like the best person in our church at this. Like this sermon was not for me. You're like, whoa. And so I would say another big sign is to check on if you are truly continuing to train in godliness, or if you've grown that, like the word you used, rote, right? Or apathetic or complacent. Is the hunger still there? Is the desire still there? Is the zeal still there?
Yeah. And I think as you've talked about this too, it is important to remember that none of this discredits the knowledge that you gained at a certain stage. It really is like, look at it like aging, where now that, because in your adolescent phase or whatever, you gained so much knowledge, you get to stand firm upon that, and you get to use that to bless younger Christians, right? You return to these stage 1 Christians and go, oh, you're trying to learn about that. I learned about that. I can help you with that. Rather than viewing it as like, okay, well, I can't get too puffed up in my knowledge, so I need to try and go back down
learn stuff. I should stop learning things.
Yeah, it's more like, take what you've learned, pass it on. Take what you've gone through, pass it on. Use it to bless people. And you are multiplying.
It's the increasing awareness of what to do with the knowledge you've gained. It's, okay, I don't just possess this just to possess it. I possess it to honor God and advance his kingdom. And so I want to possess more of it so that I can honor God and advance his kingdom. And it's this beautiful self-perpetuating cycle.
Because at the end of the day, the knowledge doesn't make you mature. It helps. It builds a foundation, but it doesn't make you mature. It's how you use it that actually makes you mature, and not you can be smart and immature, or you can be mature and use what you've learned,
Yeah, book smarts does not equate to maturity. Can certainly help, but it is not a synonymous.
Yeah. Yeah, A does not equal B.
A does not equal B. Nope.
Yeah.
All right. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
See you.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for a midweek conversation. If you missed this sermon that this related to, you can find it down below. Otherwise, if you want to make sure you stay up to date on all our content and resources, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.